So I'm at a point, honestly, where I'm pretty sure the MPC platform, in this case, the MPC Key 61, but really the MPC Live 2, MPC 1, MPC Key, maybe the MPC X, although I kind of feel like the X is overpriced, but who am I to say on that one? I do feel like this platform at this point is kind of the best jack of all trades platform when it comes to standalone music production, especially because the MPCs can also be used in a controller mode where you can transfer your files over and your projects over and then use VSTs if you want to. That's not how I work. I tend to just export all my stems out. But the fact that you can do all of that and the ease of use of using the platform to do sound design and song creation makes it, for me, probably the best value option, or just the best overall option in 2023 moving into 2024. And I want to be clear that I don't think it's perfect, and it's definitely not the only good option. Something like the Ableton Push or the Maschine Plus in some ways have better sounds, and when I export projects out of them, I feel like they sound better or closer to finish than most of the projects I make on an MPC. But at the same time, there's just so much more you can do in the box on this thing than those other two machines, especially the Key 61 if you're looking for keys, or if you want phantom power for a condenser mic, although I use dynamic mics most of the time, and so I don't generally need phantom power, and therefore Ableton Push, MPC 1, MPC Live, Maschine Plus, they all work for me as well for recording vocals if I need to. Although, to be honest, I usually record my vocals in a DAW, at least my final vocals. So I don't hold the ability to record crystal clear, perfect audio as like a gold standard that I need. But if you do, the MPC Key 61 or the Akai Force are the only options that have phantom power of the ones I'm talking about right now. And the MPCs are the only one that have a software side that you can plug it into a computer and then use as a controller in conjunction with VSTs, whereas Force, you'd have to do some MIDI routing and it's not nearly as native of an integration. Now, something I want to be clear about is that I don't think it is easy to learn the MPC, and I don't think it's the most intuitive of the options on the market. In fact, it may be the least intuitive. When I recommend an MPC, sometimes I can forget how hard it was to learn the MPC platform compared to something like the Maschine Plus or the Ableton Push. Now, it may just be dependent on where you started, but for me, learning the MPC was a huge headache, and the first time I used an MPC Live, Generation 1 or Mark 1, I was like, I don't think this is for me. But then I missed it when I sold it. I got a Mark 2, and I realized, oh, actually, I think I'm pretty into this platform. Once you wrap your head around it, you start to realize how powerful it is. I've talked about this before, but you're not just stuck with the plugins, of which there are quite a few options now, but you can also sample, create key groups or drum kits, or take a single sample and layer it with another sample and record your voice over that. And then you have access to a suite of plugin effects that is constantly expanding. And those effects are part of why I wanted to make this video, because recently they updated the MPC platform again to include a few more free plugins, the Air Expander, which I haven't tried, and then the multi-tap delay, vintage filter, and Air Chorus, which I have tried. I don't have Air Delay Pro or Jura Chorus right now, although I may ask Akai for those. In the past, they've given me codes for some of the other plugins to show on my channel. But right now, I've really just been messing with the vintage filter, the multi-tap delay, and the chorus to create some new plugins or sounds. And I just realized that this device, more so than any of the other standalone devices, maybe even more than the other MPCs, like the MPC Key 61, is the best device for someone like me to have a sound idea and then turn it into a reality and then play it all in one device. Because it has the keyboard, it really is such a cool creativity machine for me. And I'm definitely aware that this could come off sounding like an ad, which really isn't my intention. It's not a perfect device. Like I said, the sound quality of all the plugins is not as good, in my opinion, as the sound quality of the plugins on, say, the Ableton Push if you have Suite. Although the price of that gets way higher than buying like a used MPC 1 and then buying some of the plugins on sale. It's more the fact that it can do so many things in one. I have commenters who've talked about this before, but the MPC platform is one of the few ones where I think the only real limitation is your imagination, whereas something like the Maschine Plus is limited in the built-in plugins that it has access to. Even though Native Instruments makes a huge suite of amazing sounds, you only have access to a small subset of those. And the Ableton Push, while it does run basically everything in Ableton Suite, it is a device that feels by its design meant to be a controller more than a standalone device. I'm not normally someone who thinks devices that don't have touchscreens should have touchscreens, But using this device to do real-time sound design and just general song creation, because it was designed to have a touchscreen and because of how the touchscreen is integrated along with the shortcut buttons, it really is such a fast, fluid, and intuitive and hands-on way to do sound design and just general music production. And because of that, even though it's kind of a DAW in a box, it gets so many benefits for being a standalone all-in-one device that make it just a more interesting way to create music, in my opinion. You know, originally this wasn't gonna be a review, but I'm gonna make this a review. And look, I wanna be really clear that I am not a master of this device. There are plenty of people out there who are much better at using the MPCs, who have used them to make a bunch of full songs. I have a few songs that will be on my next album that have started as MPC projects, so I'm not unfamiliar with building out full tracks. But I will say there are always going to be better experts. Much like the MPC, I'm kind of a jack of all trades when it comes to this gear. I have an approximate knowledge of a lot of it. I'm not an expert in almost any single piece of individual gear. So please keep that caveat in mind, and also know that I received this device from Zounds on loan for free. So, as I note in any video where that's true, I have less skin in the game than someone who bought it, but I will say this is one of those devices I could easily imagine myself buying, especially now that it's gone on sale for cheaper, or you can get it used for even less than that. Last time I looked, this was $1,500 new, and I've seen them around $1,000 on Reverb. And for that money, you're getting a keyboard with monophonic aftertouch. You're getting a really nice set of onboard controls tied directly to software that allows you to create basically any genre of music you could want. You also essentially have a full vocal recording suite with an auto-tune or, real-time pitch correction, voice doubler, a ton of other effects. And you can sample and resample using all of those old school MPC types of production in combination with what is essentially a DAW in a box, with a whole suite of built-in and available purchasable plugins. Some highlights include OpX4, which is a 4 oscillator or 4 operator FM synth, Fabric XL, which is kind of like a basic rompler, but with a lot of sound design options. Mini D, which is an emulation of the Moog Model D. The Jura, which is a Juno emulator, I think Juno 106, and then a bunch of built-in ones like Hype, Tube Synth, which isn't amazing, but you can do good things with it with the right effects. Odyssey, Selena, Mellotron, Bassline, Drum Synth, Electric, those are all built in, and then a bunch of built-in effects. And so beyond all that, you also have access to a bunch of potential paid expansions from either Akai or third-party creators who've made a bunch of key groups and preset packs and other things for the MPC because it's such a broadly used platform. Now again, you're gonna wanna spend some time to understand how the sound of this thing may sound a little different when you export into a DAW, if you are exporting into a DAW, which is how I generally do it. And that is pretty easy because you just go into song mode, build out your song, hit export, and then export out either stems or the entire thing. It really is just an all-in-one package. Now, it's not perfect. I know when Ben Jordan got his, he had a lot of issues at launch. I've not run into almost any issues, but I also haven't pushed it as hard as he did. And there are a lot of areas where you can push these different devices. Now, I think every device kind of runs into issues. It seems like the Electron boxes are some of the most stable, and then you kind of go down the line of instability depending on which manufacturer and which device you're looking at. Now, depending on your use case, that is either an acceptable trade-off or a total deal breaker. For me, given the stability I've seen on this device, I feel pretty comfortable with it as a production device. I haven't tried to use it as a performance device, which is what Ben Jordan wanted to do. And I don't know if it's gotten better in that regard. And much like the last video I made talking about the Ableton Push in controller mode, I do worry about all of these devices as far as building entire live sets. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that it seems like you'd get a lot of benefit from using a computer versus using standalone gear in that regard, primarily because these devices just seem so designed to be used for creating individual songs at a time as production devices and not as full, I'm gonna build a live set out devices. If they were that, they would have easier ways to queue up multiple projects back to back, or they would have less limitations on the amount of plugins, which is just a reality of the hardware. I've actually reached out to Native Instruments in the past about how it would be cool to have a way to get the next song in your Maschine Plus ready to go and buffered so that when it starts playing songs, it doesn't like choke when it starts playing a new sound or sample. I don't think this would have the same problem, but some of the heavier plugins on the MPCs also take a while to load. So your project will load, but the actual plugin won't be ready to go right away. Things like that make me hesitant to use a multi-project setup in a live set, which then limits you to a single project setup, which then hits the hardware limitations way faster. If you have ideas for how to work around that, or how you've done it in real life, please let me know in the comments. So in summary, is this thing worth your money? I think so. It really depends on what you're looking for. The MPC 1 is much cheaper. The MPC Live 2 is portable, has a battery and a speaker. If you don't play keys, then I don't think there's a benefit to buying the key outside of phantom power, I suppose. And if you need something smaller, then obviously this is quite a bit of room compared to the other MPCs. But I do think if I was just getting started, knowing everything I know about all these different pieces of gear and how I like to compose music, which is primarily with a keyboard, this is the device that I would want if I was starting out. If I was like a rich kid and I somehow had the ability to get something like this when I was a teenager, this would be what I would want to start with. And not just start with, I often recommend starting with more complex gear than you might consider a beginner should start with, because there's so much room to grow. I quickly hit the limits of what I found interesting dragging loops around in GarageBand and Sony Acid when I was 14 and 15, and I quickly moved on to DAWs like FL Studio and Ableton, where I was able to stretch my wings and actually learn a lot. And this device just has so much headroom, maybe not literally in hardware power compared to other devices, but in its own walled garden standalone way. It is so hard to find real limitations on the types of sounds you can make, especially with the ability to resample, create key groups, etc. You are pretty much limited by your imagination when it comes to building individual songs. And like I said, I'm not totally sure about live sets. That's where I think it could struggle, but I think it's a struggle that it shares with the Maschine Plus, the Ableton Push and standalone, and the Akai Force to a lesser degree. I would love it if there were updates for all of those devices focused on turning your individual songs into full live performances. I'm considering checking out the SP404 Mark II because it seems so geared towards live performance, and there's an argument that you could just load up individual entire stems or like individual instrumentals on all the pads in a single project. Although you may run into BPM issues, you might be able to write different sequences because you can have a global or a sequential BPM. So maybe sequence 1 is 120, sequence 3 is 140, etc. And then there's just one pad with an entire instrumental. You'll probably hit a RAM issue, but if you're not using like the highest quality audio, you might be able to get away with that. But that just seems like the most boring basic version of what I would want to do. I would much rather have the ability to have one project ready to go and the other project live, and then queue up and process all of the sounds and effects on one project, and then fade into it as it simultaneously loads the next project, and then have the ability to queue that one by one by one. And maybe even have the ability to then have different presets on the pitch correction and other vocal suite stuff so that you can keep using the microphone, but as it blends into the next project, your same audio signal still works, but it now has the necessary pitch correction for the new key of the new song. Anyway, getting a little in the weeds here, but that is what I'd love to see. But as far as what it is, it's one of the best on the market in my opinion. But sincerely, as noted before, if cost is an issue, I highly recommend the MPC 1. I think it's a fantastic device still in 2023. Either the Plus or one of the original models used online for probably $400. It's really hard to go wrong with the MPC 1. This is a step up, but the MPC 1 would easily allow you to plug in a MIDI controller. And the only thing that would be a huge headache for me on the MPC 1 versus this device is that the MPC 1 original does not have Wi-Fi, and you'd be surprised how often it's kind of necessary to have Wi-Fi for easy updates and plugging or downloading the plugins. It's not a deal breaker. You can plug in Ethernet, or you can probably use USB to update as well, but it is still very convenient to have Wi-Fi and a standalone device like this. And in the off chance this is the first video you've ever seen about the Key 61, you should know it has 4 more gigs of RAM, it has a SATA drive but no SD card slot, but it does have multiple USB ports that make it pretty simple to plug in USB media as well. Value is subjective, price changes all the time, but for me personally, if you've watched my channel before, you kind of know what I'm interested in. To me, the MPC Key 61 is the real deal. And in 2023, as an actual review, this gets my seal of approval. Something like a 9 out of 10 if I was going to use a numerical scale. Anyway, thanks for watching. Consider checking out my album, There's Something Better. I've got more music on the way. My Instagram is a good place to see the random things I'm working on. I'll link that in the description, I suppose. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. All right, bye. Every single one's become sane.
And I just don't know what I can move past the things that